Well, hello, friends. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of Reading Michael Jackson. I am your host, Lena, and I'm so happy to be here with you today, this week of Michael Jackson's birthday. So at the top of this episode, let me just tell you my plans. While I do intend to get right into the episode very quickly, I want to just let you know one thing. So if you've been following this podcast for a little bit, you know that on June 25th, I released a bonus episode to commemorate Michael's death. Well, I thought if I did that for a sad anniversary, then I want to do it for a happy one, which is Michael's birthday. So Michael Jackson would be 67 years old this Friday, August 29th. So I thought, all right, I'll release my normal Tuesday episode and then another one for Friday. And that's what I'm going to do. So you can look forward to a bonus episode this week released Friday morning. Now, I will say, while the last bonus episode was pretty long and it was kind of emotional, as a reminder, or if you didn't actually listen to that one yet, I read an essay I wrote about my experience visiting Neverland. So that was very intense. This birthday episode is not going to be intense. It's actually just going to be a fun, kind of silly, enjoyable conversation, I hope, about Michael and all aspects of things that I love about Michael, Michael's music that I love, just various things that I think would be interesting to fans. Now, if you are here just for serious discussion, it may not be the ideal episode for you, but if you want something a little bit lighter to listen to on your way to work or whatever, and you don't have any idea for how you would otherwise commemorate Michael's birthday, then listen to that episode. I think you'll enjoy it, but that will be dropping on Friday. And then we'll just be returning to our regular programming next week. So keep an eye out for that. Otherwise, we are just going to get into this week's episode. So for this week's piece, we have another short essay or reflection written in a prose style. I think next week and a couple weeks after we'll be returning to more poetry, but for now we're sticking with prose. So now's the time that I invite you to get comfortable and get cozy and join me for this reading of A Child is a Song. A child is a song. When children listen to music, they don't just listen. They melt into the melody and flow with the rhythm. Something inside starts to unfold its wings. Soon the child and the music are one. I feel that way too in the presence of music, and my best moments of creativity have often been spent with children. When I am around them, music comes to me as easily as breathing. Each song is a child I nourish and give my love to. But even if you have never written a song, your life is a song. How can it not be? In wave after wave, nature caresses you. The rhythm of each dawn and each sunset is part of you. The falling rain touches your soul, and you see yourself in the clouds that are playing tag with the sun. To live is to be musical, starting with the blood dancing in your veins. Everything living has a rhythm. To feel each one softly and attentively brings out its music. Do you feel your music? Children do, but once we grow up, life becomes a burden and a chore, and the music grows fainter. Sometimes the heart is so heavy that we turn away from it and forget that its throbbing is the wisest message of life. A wordless message that says, live, be, Move, rejoice, you are alive. Without the heart's wise rhythm, we could not exist. When I begin to feel a little tired or burdened, children revive me. I turn to them for new life, new music. Two brown eyes look at me so deeply, so innocently. Inside I murmur, this child is a song. It is so true and direct an experience that instantly I realize again, I am a song also. I am back to myself once more. Okay, so this was a really interesting piece to me. Now, obviously, we are toward the end of this book. There have been a lot of pieces about children, and there are still a few more to come. But that's what's interesting, I think, about this piece. Well, yes, there's this overall theme of children and innocence and children being closer to understanding something about life than adults, which is a common theme that Michael has explored throughout this book so far. There's also a new and interesting approach to talking about both children and creativity and ultimately life that we can see here in this essay. So I'm actually really excited to delve into it. I took a couple of notes very quickly in the book because I don't want to forget all the many things I noticed and want to draw attention to in our discussion today. So we'll start with just reviewing as we go through each paragraph, and I'll try to draw attention to the things that I'm seeing that are the most important in this piece for me. First of all, the title, A Child is a Song, is really interesting because you can imagine any creative person or musician might call their art something like their child. You know, it's this thing they nurture and build and birth and create in their own way. But you don't often hear of it as the reverse. You know, like if a painter wrote, a child is a painting, that would be really interesting, right? Like it makes you immediately think, okay, what way is he going to reverse our expectation here? So starting with the first few lines, he says, when children listen to music, they don't just listen. And he describes children getting lost in the sounds and rhythms of music. And you know, instantly I thought of little viral videos online of little kids hearing Michael Jackson for the first time or being really obsessed with Michael Jackson music. And it's really sweet. It's really sweet to watch because you just see like the rhythms take over their body and they just dance without any kind of self-consciousness, any kind of awareness. They just exist and exude the joy and the rhythm that they are feeling as they hear that music. Actually, many years ago, there was this really cute video of this little boy, this tiny little toddler. I think he was with his family who were all white, and they were in some public park, and there was this black family right next to them that seemed to be having like a cookout or something like that. And I didn't get the impression these groups were together. Anyway, at some point, Don't Stop Till You Get Enough started playing, and this little boy was just dancing so hard. He was like 1.5 or 2. Like he was so little and he was dancing so hard. And the other family was just like cheering and hollering and so excited about it. It was just incredibly cute to watch this little kid just like getting down. You know, anyway, it reminded me of so many videos I have seen like that. Not just, of course, with Michael's music, but, you know, for the purpose of this podcast, it's especially adorable when I see that with Michael's music. But of course, it did make me think about that. Why is it that children are so completely free when it comes to dancing and just expressing themselves? And it's not like it's every child. There are always going to be kids that, even when they were little, are a little bit more shy and reserved. But I would say most kids have a sense of freedom that adults really don't have. I mean, dancing is incredibly fun, but how many of us are just embarrassed to do it? You know, which is sad if you think about it. But I feel like that's part of what he's talking about here. This lack of the self, this lack of self-consciousness, which is kind of a lack of ego in a way, a self-awareness, or this idea that there's a self to protect or an ego to protect. That lack allows for a more thorough and enjoyable experience in a way, because you can just freely exist, And I sometimes think when I see children like that, the only other people I see like that are sometimes the very old, the very elderly, who have also lost a sense of self-consciousness. And I imagine for them, it's not about a lack of self-identity or ego like, a child lacks. It's more of a reconfiguration of what it means to have a self to be aware of and what it means to worry about the judgments of the world. Anyway, that's a little off topic, but I find that kind of interesting to contemplate. Like, what exactly is it about children? Is it that lack of self-consciousness? Or is it something else? Like, Michael refers to music often as being this kind of connection to God or higher power. We talked about recently in another episode some of his philosophies about children seeming to reflect a belief that children are closer to God. And so it also is like, is it just a self-consciousness, or is it truly an ability to feel it differently? Because I will say, I think there are people who simply feel art, whether that's music or visual art or theater or anything else, who just feel it differently. They just feel it differently. They have a different sensory experience. And it makes me wonder how many of us actually can feel very deeply on a sensory level, but as we get older, that gets kind of drowned out. And that's perhaps also what makes children so much more attuned. Anyway, there's obviously a lot I can say about that, but let's move on. He goes on in the second paragraph to address the title on some level, right? So he says, each song is a child I nourish and give my love to. And instantly that made me think about his philosophy when it came to songwriting and how interesting that is to apply to a philosophy of parenting or children. So to review, Michael had this philosophy, not just of perfection. His perfectionism is always talked about, right? But his philosophy was about allowing the music to write itself, allowing the song to blossom before him, where he had this idea that it already existed somewhere in its perfect form. It was up to him to figure out how to draw out its characteristics and its features in order to create in life a match for what it was always meant to be. So he talked about believing that his songs existed in space somewhere and that he was the conduit through which they came. If you think about that idea where you don't push and pull something to become what you want it to be, you don't try to control it, but you give it space to figure itself out and become what it's meant to, and you trust the process, like Michael did with his music, which is, again, part of why it took him longer to write, took him longer to create stuff. He constantly had the vision, but he wanted to give it time. He didn't want to push it. When you think about that, what a beautiful application to parenting, where instead of thinking about your child as having to be something that we want them to be, having to match our expectations in some way or live up to our dreams and our vision, we instead let them become who they were meant to and help guide them toward that. So help identify their gifts, their strengths, their weaknesses, help them become the strongest they can be and the most powerful and most perfect vision of who they were meant to be, rather than trying to force them into some kind of preconceived idea. And I just think that's fascinating to think about how Michael's perception of creativity and his own songwriting could apply to his view of how to treat children, how to treat maybe his own children. I'm not sure, but from everything I've heard about how he's treated his own children, he was a very attentive and supportive father. And that kind of radical acceptance for everything and everyone and allowing space to exist while still holding people and songs to a high standard of accountability, I think that's quite interesting. So just something to think about, I think, in this conversation. He goes on here to say and point out that even if you are not a creative person, you still exist in song and your life is a song. And I want to get into that point more too, but I want to point out something that if you're only listening to Dancing the Dream through me reading it, you won't see this. But when he says this line, he writes, "In wave after wave, nature caresses you. The rhythm of each dawn and each sunset is a part of you." And in that line, he capitalizes the word nature. Or he capitalizes the N in nature, making it a proper noun. Kind of like people will often capitalize the G in God or the H in him or he in reference to God. I find that very interesting. Michael, being a religious person, a faithful person, a person clearly familiar with religion, that is not an unintentional choice to capitalize the N in nature. And it once again reinforces the very high regard he holds nature in. And I just wanted to mention it since it's not something you can see if you're just listening to this. But within this entire paragraph, he talks about how our lives mirror song and our existence is built on the backbone of musical rhythm. And he talks about the rhythm of our blood dancing in our veins and how everything in life has a rhythm. Everything in our body has a rhythm and a sound. And children can hear that and tap into it more, but we can't as we get older. And I found this really, really interesting, specifically with Michael Jackson being the one to say this. Why, might you ask? Well, it's possibly obvious, but if it's not, Michael, as a singer and as a vocalist, was extremely rhythmic, right? We all know this. But one of the most unique elements of Michael's vocal performance in his music is the inclusion of bodily sounds. So he includes the sound of him taking a breath, of him deeply or quickly exhaling, of him gulping for air, of hiccups, of gasps, using his breath to create a kind of secondary vocal performance right along with his actual singing, so that it's almost like a song is braided between the sound of his voice, vocalizing the melody, and his breath, kind of peppering that vocal performance with a unique blend of rhythm. I find this really interesting because if you think about this philosophy and how he actually applies it to life, I mean, this is not just a piece he's writing for Dancing the Dream. This is something Michael Jackson embodied. This idea that music existed everywhere and within us. I mean, he very famously, right? He very famously used his own heartbeat as the intro to the song Smooth Criminal. And this is something that actually makes me a little bit emotional because sometimes when I listen to that song, specifically the intro, I think, my God, that is a recording of his actual physical body. You know, Michael is this larger than life figure. Even to big fans and huge fans, I think it's easy to kind of forget that he was a human being because, you know, I mean, he's Michael Jackson. But when you think about the fact that that was his actual human heart beating inside of his own chest, and it's recorded for eternity into this extremely famous song, that makes me emotional personally. It just does. It just does. And I mean, sometimes it's enough for me just to know that it's his voice actually singing into a microphone and I get to hear it, that makes me emotional. But the idea that he incorporated his physicality in such a significant way. I mean, he's credited for finger snaps on his albums, he incorporated the sounds of his feet stomping as he danced while recording. I mean, this is a person who absolutely embodied music in every way. When you watch videos of him just casually hanging out and music comes on, he can't help but start dancing along with it. I mean, you see it in all kinds of scenarios, including in the Mexico deposition where he's being questioned about the authenticity of his own music and they're playing pieces and he literally can't help but start moving, So there is this aspect of Michael that he embodies exactly what he's talking about here. But I think the use of these bodily sounds in his unique style as an artist is one of the coolest things about Michael that can't really be recreated by anyone else. It's not like Michael invented that idea, but it's so associated with him because the style of singing and the style of vocal performance, and even if you strip down and hear the multi-tracks of some of these songs where you can hear him heavily beatboxing in the background. A really good example, actually, people always talk about Who Is It and Stranger in Moscow and all these songs that we know he wrote with the beatboxing. But I have to recommend, I know I've recommended this before, Chris Lipe's YouTube channel. He's a vocal coach and he does a lot of reactions to famous singers. And he has a whole big series of Michael Jackson songs that he's reacted to, specifically the multi-tracks. So you can hear the detailed breakdown on a track level when recording. So you can isolate the vocals versus, the music or whatever. Anyway, one of the best ones that he covered was actually Blood on the Dance Floor. When it comes to what I'm talking about here with the beatboxing and this physicality brought into the song, I highly recommend checking out the Blood on the Dance Floor multi-track reaction so you can get a really strong appreciation for what I'm saying here. I'll include a link to that in the description. Either way, the point being, Michael embodies it, and how cool to read about that philosophy here, but to see that mirrored in his music, 10 years prior to the release of this book. Just really neat. But then he goes on to actually discuss a bit more about this connection to life that we have through the rhythms of our body. He says that as we get older, life becomes burdensome and difficult, and he even calls it a chore, and that the music starts to grow fainter. But then he says this line that I think is absolutely incredible. He says, "Sometimes the heart is so heavy that we turn away from it and forget that its throbbing is the wisest message of life. A wordless message that says, live, be, move, rejoice, you're alive." I got such chills when I read that and thinking about what he's talking about. Sometimes I'll do that, actually. I'll just place my hand on my chest and I'll feel my heart beating and I'm just in awe. Do you ever do that? Where you feel your pulse, or you feel the way your chest rises and falls when you breathe and you're like, oh my God, what? How is this happening? Just the miraculousness of these systems working to remind you of your own life. I mean, I think the point being that this is this biological process, but the rhythms and the sound can be the voice that we hear. So our biology might keep us going, but it's the message behind it that tells us that story about living and being and moving and rejoicing, the continuation of the body. Without the heart's wise rhythm, we could not exist. And it's true, obviously, on a biological level, but I love that this is being treated as not just a moment to think, hey, let's be grateful for life, but it's a different way to reimagine what it means to have your heart still beating. And it makes me wonder about the collective sound of all of our hearts beating and what that would sound like. I don't know. This makes me really happy. I just got this rush of like warmth through my body as I was thinking about this, because it's such a beautiful philosophy to apply to life. It's so easy to just tell yourself over and over, show gratitude for every day, and we never know when it will end and all this. Absolutely true. But the groundedness of talking about the specific rhythm of the heartbeat and what that represents, if you think of it instead as not just biology, but as music, this fuel for life that wants you to dance, because any rhythm, like this rhythm, would want you to dance. It would want you to stand up and rejoice and celebrate and experience what it is to be alive. I find this just incredibly beautiful to think about. And it actually reminds me of my one and only Michael Jackson tattoo that I have. Now, I love tattoos and I love Michael Jackson tattoos. All of my tattoos I have are very small, and they're not things people would necessarily know what they are if I didn't explain it to them. So I knew when I got a Michael Jackson tattoo, I wanted it to be the same way. So my immediate thought was that I wanted Michael Jackson's handwriting. I really liked the idea of tattooing his handwritten lyrics to Another Part of Me, because Another Part of Me is a song that lyrically kind of sums up my entire philosophy about being alive, but that's another time. That's an episode for another season, maybe. But I'll be honest, I also couldn't find any handwritten lyrics of Another Part of Me. And I really couldn't decide otherwise. I had a lot of ideas, but I couldn't decide. And then I came across this handwritten note that Michael had written and given to his fans who were waiting outside of his hotel once. And in this note, he wrote, well, you know what? I'll just read you the whole note. This was apparently a note he gave to fans on November 11th, 2008. So very far from the time that this book was released. And also not that long before his death the following year. It says, I truly love all of you. I am recording tonight for all of you. You are my true inspiration forever. I am living for you and the children. Be alive, be free. Feel consciousness, subconsciousness, being God. I love you, Michael Jackson and family. And I just absolutely instantly loved this note. And so I got the handwritten note of him saying, be alive, be free, tattooed on my wrist. And I love it. No one in the world would know it was Michael Jackson but me. And if I'm telling people when I meet them, but I absolutely love it. And I love it in part because it's a philosophy that I've always felt excited and inspired by, but that like this piece today that I'm reading and this section that we're talking about is essentially that. It's essentially that. It's being free. It's embracing aliveness. It's trying to hear the music that you create and that you are uniquely bringing to this world. And what a beautiful message to relay to his fans, and obviously one that he had internalized. This is the crazy stuff I think about when I think about how the world was treating Michael in 2008. I mean, let's be honest, much earlier than that too. But just generally, the way the world treated him, the way I understood his life and I understood him to be prior to becoming a fan, I never would have known he would write a note like that to his fans. Like, I didn't know he had this inside of him at all. And it's just sad. You know, it's just sad to think about the ways in which a person can be misrepresented in the world, and through that misrepresentation, be kept locked away from so many people and their love that they would surely give him, you know, and vice versa. It's just very sad. Anyway, not to get on that, because this is otherwise, I think, a delightful piece and episode. I don't want to end it on a sad note. It's just, I love reviewing these pieces in light of Michael's life and everything he had created up until this point in the early 90s, and then to know where his life headed after and be able to look at how these things were consistent within him or how these things may have changed. That's one of the most fascinating things, I think, about reading Michael Jackson. And I don't mean the podcast. I mean trying to understand him and learn about him and be open to whatever you learn. One of the most fascinating aspects of that experience is that this is a person whose almost entire life was on display from the time he was born until he died. And the very sad nature of that also allows a very unique privilege for us to be able to look at his life. I mean, there are interviews he conducted as a little boy and interviews he conducted not long before he died. We have his voice and narrative changing over the years, and we have it here purely in this book and in his songs. So there's just so much to look at. And how often do you really get to look at someone so fully in the whole context of their life when you're trying to understand them? It's pretty rare. And this has already been pretty long, so I don't want to linger too much, but I don't want to skip the final lines here without at least referencing how beautiful and, touching they were to me. At the end, he talks about when he gets overburdened in life, how children can revive him. And he says, "It is so true and obvious to him that a child is a song, that it helps him realize again, I am a song also. I am back to myself once more." And I just think that that's a really beautiful way to end this essay, but also just it's touching to me to think about him going through that journey. I mean, a couple of weeks ago, we had the episode Angel of Light. And in that, I talked about how I was melting because it's just sweet to imagine, to me, him sitting there with this very intentional, meditative introspection, trying to understand himself further and identify his soul and find his angel and all that. And there are so many pieces where he talks about things like that. But this is one of those reminders again, a reminder of that humanity, of feeling overburdened, of struggling, and then a reminder of that kind of enlightenment that he also possessed, which was to identify himself once again as a song and feel a return to himself. It's just a beautiful and consistent message throughout this book that there is this internal self that we must stay and reconnect to, and that is connected to our innocence, and that children for him were a reminder of that, and that was so much of his connection to children. And I can see the need for such a thing when you grow up the way Michael did. I can't imagine how hard it is to have an accurate sense of self when you're growing up in the public eye. So to have anything in life that grounds you to yourself and reminds you of who you actually are in an ego way or a spiritual way or whatever, I think that must have been quite invaluable to him. And again, very misunderstood, unfortunately. But with that said, I am going to draw this episode to a close. I've really enjoyed this piece a lot. I didn't expect to have quite as much to say about it as I did. But then again, I am me and you are still here. So what does that say? I'm just kidding. I'm very happy to have been able to spend some time with you today talking about this piece and our wonderful Michael. Remember, I will be releasing a bonus episode on Friday to celebrate Michael. It should be a more fun episode, a bit more lighthearted episode, though of course I am me and I do get into my feelings a little bit. It is meant to be celebratory, so I do hope you check that out if that interests you. Otherwise, I will see you all next week. Have a wonderful week and weekend, and happy early birthday, Michael, and I will talk to you all soon.